So to kick things off, I'm going to actually have these folks introduce themselves, since we all sat completely out of order from what Graham just introduced. And obviously, we're kicking things off today with business leaders, CEOs and business leaders, to get their perspective on the impact of technology and the impact that CIOs can have specifically for innovation. So if I could ask you each to do a quick introduction of yourself, the role you play, and also, I think most importantly, the business that you lead, kind of the strategy of the business you lead.
Great. I'll kick things off. So good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Capicella, and I'm a Senior Vice President with Microsoft. And I get to work on the part of Microsoft that essentially builds all of our productivity tools. So Microsoft Office, Exchange, and SharePoint, and Office Communication Server. And for our part of the business, we represent maybe a third of the Microsoft overall business. You know, our job and our strategy is really one where we're trying to really predict 3-4 years from now, how will the way people collaborate, how will the way people work change? And then how can we help lead that transition with the tools that we give people to use sort of every single day. So for us, we think very broadly about what productivity means and what collaboration means, and how you can make a transformation from the way people are used to working to a more productive, more interesting, more empowering future. And that's essentially what Office and the products I look after are sort of all about. Very, very pleased to be here.
Great, thanks, Chris. Sundar?
Great. Well, first of all, it's always good to be back at MIT. You know, when you say things like the cloud at MIT, it's very specific what you mean. If you cross the river, you'd have to specify if it's the volcanic cloud or the compute cloud, but at MIT, I think there's no question what we speak about. So I've had the good fortune of being involved with about a half dozen companies that have gone from a few people to a few thousand, one of which found its way into Microsoft through Razorfish. But right now I'm involved with two companies. One, a gene sequencing company where we take DNA, digitize it, and then it becomes an information problem. How do you actually figure out what to do with that? What does it mean? How do you do research with that? And the second is Cambridge Technology Enterprises, where we have automated tools that will take applications from one environment and move them to another. So whether it's you know, a version of SAP to another one, or from legacy applications to the cloud, you know, we have automated tools to do that. So thanks for having me here. I look forward to it.
Thank you. And Bob?
Hi, I'm Bob Burke. It's great to be here. I'm the CEO of ATG. We're headquartered nearby in Kendall Square. We're the leading e-commerce software company. Many of you in the audience or your families have used our software in the last few weeks. So if you go to places like bestbuy.com and you buy a TV, or you go to AT&T and you buy an iPhone, or if you're in Europe and you go to Vodafone or Walmart Asda, you're basically interacting with ATG software. So increasingly, obviously, one of the things that people are looking for e-commerce software is also to power other things, mobile, social, even in-store devices. Certainly in the call center, where obviously the link is people shop online and then they move to various channels. All these are very important elements. We are primarily a North America and Europe headquartered company today, or where locations are, but increasingly, obviously, this is a worldwide phenomenon. So very good to be here today. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. And our return panelist from last year, Bob.
Thanks, Darren. Good morning, everyone. I'm Bob Brennan, CEO of Iron Mountain. We are an information management services company whose strategy is very straightforward and is actually a relatively narrow agenda, Chris, compared to the broad perspective you have. We're really looking at how we can help companies get rid of most of their information. We have a strong history in this so that we can focus on what needs to be quarantined because it's subject to regulation or oversight, and then bring utility out of that which you're keeping. We do that. We go back to, we have our roots in physical storage, so we keep in all likelihood, we have your lawyer's information, your doctor's information, your banker's information, and it goes way back. But that gives us a DNA around how the record is managed and what needs to be gotten rid of. We've used that history where we have 1,100 locations in 39 countries to build a digital business, which today is about 250 million, but is growing much quicker than our overall business and where we believe we have an opportunity to create a value proposition that says, let us sit in your data path, we'll get rid of most of your information so you can really separate the signal from the noise and get after that which will bring you business utility.
Great.
And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So great, different perspectives, I think, a lot of different organizations. I'm going to kick things off with some questions. I'd ask the audience to start thinking about questions as well, because pretty soon we'll turn it over to you to pose questions to the panelists. But let me start, maybe Bob, I'll go right back to you. And could you give us, before we dive into technology, give us from the CEO's perspective, your perspective, one or two key things that are sort of the foundation of your strategy for emerging stronger out of the downturn, right? From your perspective, what are you focused on this year to really pull yourselves out of the down economy and get back into a time of growth and innovation?
So we've been a subscription or annuity-based business throughout our history. So going into a downturn, we lag coming into a downturn. So there's no sharp decline going into a downturn. There's no sharp ascent coming out. So that makes our business different. And the good news is we don't have to transform to a cloud model, right? We've been a cloud model since our inception 60 years ago.
But subscriptions must have gone down a bit during the down economy, no?
Service activity went down.
Okay.
Right, so our core storage has grown 20 years consecutively. Right, information's growing like this. Information doesn't go on a recession.
Right.
But as employment drops, service activity levels drop, and people try very much to focus on cost control. What we can do, though, is I go back to my opening remark, is sit down with our customers and say, we can help you. You're holding on to more than you need to hold on to. That's human nature. It's a company's nature. It is a function of just defensiveness that exists inside of a corporation. And we can, so if you look at our destructions go up during a recession because we're able to help our customers get after what they can actually destroy. Yep. But we certainly saw service activity go down. In terms of emerging stronger, I think the themes that were put up for the day are important because it's the whole notion of moving from taking out cost to driving top line. I would argue that for most of the CIOs here, they've taken out the cost. Right? Companies have cleaned up their balance sheet. They've cleaned up their P&L. I'm not saying that there isn't more opportunity for productivity, but you run out of that, right? Driving top line is the only sustainable path to long-term profitability. And that top line is really only meant to drive profitability, but it's the only sustainable way to do it. You can't save your way to success.
Right. There's a ground to the saving, but there's not necessarily a ceiling to the top line growth.
No, if you're focused on what's possible for your customers and really getting at their problems, right? People talk about solution selling. Solution selling is really a function of understanding what problems your customers have and how that maps to what you have to offer. And fundamentally, if you can focus on that, you can help a CIO, you can help your customers drive top line. Yep. But top line is, if you come to me and you're selling to me as the CEO of Iron Mountain, and you want to save money, I have all kinds of people that you can meet with, and we're very interested in saving money. I'm interested in understanding how we can drive sustainable growth for the long term. Other than that, I'm really not that interested. I like to say internally that we have two problems, right? Driving organic growth for the very long term and all the other problems.
Yeah. Let me turn to maybe Bob and Chris, both grounded technology companies, been around for a while, seen the ups and downs. From your perspectives, what are your key strategies for emerging out of the down economy and stronger than ever? Bob?
One of the things that, if you look at the e-commerce market, we look at that as a way to not only reduce costs, but obviously grow revenues for people. So I think certainly, our customers have been impacted a little bit in terms of their revenues, although online continues to grow as a percentage of their business. So I think one of the things that we've tried to focus on is how can we help them in other ways other than just the technology part of it. So I think people are increasingly looking at technology people for more business strategy, more areas to help their business. So that's something that we've been focused on. In terms of growing our own business, it certainly is not only organic but through acquisition. So we see this as an opportunity. As we come out of this kind of recessionary times for us to actually take share and grow in the market. So, I think there's some good things to happen for people. I think it also is causing both us and our customers to maybe look more internationally as well. Because, obviously in terms of online business, there's still a lot of growth here in Europe, but obviously there's other parts of the world like South America, Asia Pacific, where it's just really at the really nascent stages.
Yep, so emerging markets and global growth for you. How about you, Chris?
Well, certainly for us, a big thing I think was recognizing that we wanted to continue to invest in new areas and invest pretty big. We felt like it was an opportunity where a lot of our competitors would probably be pulling back. And so for us to have the intestinal fortitude to say, you know what, this is actually the time to invest even more was a big part of our strategy. I would say that it forced a much, much harsher prioritization of what we focused on. So we'd had the benefit of many, many years of being able to invest in lots of areas. One of the things that that Microsoft did quite well was to say, we are going to invest huge, but we're going to invest in far fewer things. And it allowed us to think harder about the things that we don't need to do anymore. From the product development perspective, products that we don't really want to be building long term, and that I think was a very good thing. The other thing that we really doubled down on was recruiting, was trying to really attract young people to the company, knowing that the number of open roles was going to decline.
Right.
That meant that we felt that there was going to be a real boon of young people coming from MIT, from Harvard, from Berkeley, from whatever school you want to name. And there was a real opportunity, we thought, to bring people into the company at a time when it would be hard for them to find jobs. So doubling down from an investment perspective, but prioritizing that investment, and then going harder than ever after college and business school and talent. We felt like those would be two different strategies than most of our competitors would be taking, and that could set us up for a great 5 or 10 years down the road.
Great, good. And Sundar, you've come from lots of different organizations, but a lot of startup modes and kind of in the innovation world constantly. From your perspective, thinking about the two organizations you're most heavily involved in now, what's changed, or what have been your key strategies for really taking advantage of the economic, or at least coming out of the economic decline?
So, the first thing, the lucky thing about where I am is you get to pick your market. So the first thing is you pick a market where you see a lot of growth. So if you look at Gnome, where we do gene sequencing, the cost for sequencing is dropping by half every 6 months. So what cost $1 billion in 2003 costs about $20,000 today. So just as a result of that, the market actually grows even through a recession. So that's the first thing. You get into a business where there's still growth no matter what happens. There's still lots of things that happen there. The second thing is this downturn and then the consequent upturn. Actually, it teaches you one thing, which is there's massive volatility in demand. So it can go up and it can go down, and it can go dramatically in either way. In fact, this year we don't know what's going to happen in Europe and other parts of the world. So what we did when we designed the business is you design it so that you can both shrink as well as grow, rapidly. So typically what you would do is you try to get your business model really stable and then start outsourcing key components of it when you have actually found the right partners. But in our case, what we did is early on, we outsourced, some of the most strategic parts of our business. So the entire sequencing portion we outsourced to Beijing Genomics, which is a giant Chinese institute that sequences genomes, and they're now the world's largest. When we started, they weren't. Now they are the world's largest because they've done hundreds of millions of dollars of investments constantly. The second thing is obviously when we designed the IT infrastructure, we did that with the private cloud and then the public cloud as a way to have low cost when we're doing it in-house and security and all those things, but then also be able to burst into the public cloud. So the IT infrastructure also was designed to be able to grow rapidly and then shrink back so you don't have any fixed cost. And what we concentrated on are on the things that actually glue these things together. And then we did some things that were not exactly obvious. For instance, we insourced legal, because if you look at what is going to be a constant cost, especially in anything to do with healthcare, it's going to be legal. Yeah. So we actually insourced and kept all the lawyers in-house and the finance. So it's almost the reverse of any business in the sense that some of your strategic parts are outside and some of the things that you would consider tactical are actually
So what
inside.
are the key learnings that come from that, right? Because that's a challenge for all of us that are running, the accountability that we have with letting something outside of your doors. So what are some of the lessons learned from that approach?
I mean, I think one is if you kind of like you burn the bridges. Once you decide you have to do it, you figure this stuff out because you can always find a reason not to do it. Saying, hey, when we shipped first of all to China, the customs office would open the DNA and contaminate it. So you have to go through those things, and then we worked with them. So they moved a lot of the sequencing from mainland China to Hong Kong, so because the customs is a lot easier there. But if you're committed to it, I think you find a solution. If you're not, and you have an in-house backup, you'd almost say, let's just do it in-house because it's too difficult. So one thing is because we didn't have an option, we didn't even build it in-house, so we had to figure that out. The second thing is security. I mean, you do have to figure this out, but the other model we use, I mean, not to go into too many things, is we say there are two parts of your business. One is the right-hand part of your business, and the other is the left-hand. The right-hand is your existing business where you need to control, you need to have high security, you need to make sure your operational efficiency is great, that your costs are under control. And so that's one part. And then when you do this innovative business, we call them left-handed businesses. The same things that make you successful on the right hand will make you pretty unsuccessful on the left hand, because if you put that too early, you kill off your business. So we all decided, we've got to kind of take these chances. And you may have to forgive or forget about some of these things while you're doing this, but eventually when you do make it a business, you got to do those things. But in the initial phases, you just have to try to figure out how to do these things.
Burn the boats.
Exactly.
So what do you guys think of that? I mean, coming from not startups, companies that have been around for a while, could something that radical, like changing, completely changing an outsourcing strategy, maybe outsourcing something that's been strategic for you for a while, but completely going elsewhere for it, is that something that would fly in a pre-existing company that's been around for a while? Can you make that radical of a change?
Yeah, I think you can, because in our case, for example, a lot of our IT infrastructure we're outsourcing, particularly for infrastructure we're running customer systems. So I think we came to the realization that we're just not in the business of provisioning Linux servers, for example. That's not really our forte. So anytime that we can have somebody else do that, that's great. So I do agree that you do have to get to a point where you say it's really not core, and even if it is core, that's not really what our best activity and effort's going to be directed at.
Yeah. Okay.
For us, one of the big transformations we're going through is, for a long time, we've been the company that essentially provides software to our customers, and they have all the responsibility of how they deploy it and how they run it. And now with the cloud, we feel like we can take a lot of that deployment and management burden off of customer shoulders and do it ourselves. And so it's similar in that it's changing the approach. And in our case, our view is just the future is going to be a combination of obviously cloud computing and on-premise computing. And so we have to take more of an active role in insourcing, if you will, the responsibility to keep Exchange up and running for millions and millions of mailboxes that have nothing to do with Microsoft employees and have everything to do with Kraft Foods or Coca-Cola Enterprises or whoever we're running Exchange for. And that's a major, major shift for us. And at first, you have all of the, oh gosh, is that really going to be the right thing? And what does that mean for us? And the more you get into it, the more you start saying, no, we are going to run it. There is no option. As soon as you sign up that first customer,
here you go.
You're running it. And then you start to realize all the benefits of it and some of the things that you didn't know when you went in. And that transformation's it's just critical for us to do a good job on.
So let me switch gears a little bit. Given that kind of transformation and some of the strategies we've talked about from a business perspective, what does that do to your expectations as business leaders, CEOs, of your CIO? So you can think internally, first of all, your CIO within your organization, and then also for those of you who work with CIOs as customers, you can give that perspective as well. But Bob, you want to start?
Yeah, so when I think of our CIO, I think of him as a business enabler. In his case, he's a very lead point person in terms of any acquisitions that we make. In our case, we also have our CIO in charge of our facilities. So anything that we do with an acquisition in terms of where people sit, what kind of provisioning of, IT resources, he basically handles. And, I think that's enabled us to make 4 acquisitions in the last few years very smoothly. So when I think of him, it's not so much of running IT infrastructure, it's what's the enabling, things that he is able to bring to the party. And I think externally, when we think about what we're able to do for our customers, it's the same thing. We're increasingly trying to think about, well, what is the business services that we could actually bring to them, not just what kind of technology parts that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, okay. Bob, what about from your perspective?
Well, they're raised expectations, right? The expectations I have of my CIO, and then as our customers, the expectations they have of us, they're much higher. Nobody really, as I said, most of the cost has been taken out. People expect a hardened infrastructure from a technology perspective, so there's no, we're not pleased that things didn't go down. We expect them to stay up.
Right.
If I look at the way CIOs are holding us accountable as a company, it's saying, okay, great, you're able to go get a lot of my data, and you're able to provide services on top of that are a rich set of services. But if you think about your opening pitch, Bob, how can we actually make that come true in a way that I could actually provide all of my data, not just my inactive data, but all of my data, and we really could sit in front of that and say, what can legitimately be destroyed? Because most of it is garbage, it's noise. Yep. Right? And then how do we actually get to the utility and the analytics that come with that? And don't tell me it's just your company. How do you work with Microsoft? How do you provision between and amongst these companies to give competitive advantage off of the data that is everywhere? Yep. Because the top line's not coming through cost savings. Yep. And that's the competitive advantage that CIOs are being asked to deliver. And it's hard to get to because there's this incoherent mess of information that sits inside of their company, and leveraging that so that HR knows what sales is doing for competitive advantage it's a huge opportunity for the students at this school that want to be entrepreneurs. We're in the top of the first inning here. Yeah. And it's a mess. Yeah. And our customers need help.
Now, you guys obviously all have kind of a technology bent to your organizations overall. The skeptic in the audience might say, well, this may be different. You may have really high expectations of your CIO to help with innovation and so forth because you work you're running a technology company. But what about the more traditional organization, the traditional manufacturer out there? Do you think the expectations of a CIO in those kind of organizations have risen just as much as within the technology world?
Well, one of the wonderful things about the job that I get to do is I do get to talk to CIOs from every industry imaginable. And there's no doubt that everybody typically prioritizes the hiring of great people as sort of a future indicator of their company's success. And so the notion that even for a manufacturing organization, not necessarily a high-tech organization, the notion that you have to have an appealing place to work for young people to want to join your company, that has never been stronger than it is right now. The fact that people can go out and buy a great new PC, have a modern operating system, get great consumer email, 25 gigs of storage, social networking, the amount of technology people have at their fingertips in their home life usually dwarfs what organizations provide to them. High-tech industries are typically a little bit more progressive, and the pressure that people are bringing onto the CIO is pretty intense from the perspective of, hey, why do I have it so good at home and I have it so bad at work? And that notion of being attractive to the millennial generation as people leave schools like this and want to join the workforce, I think there's a real demand that CIOs are feeling to do a better job providing a great work environment so that people do want to join their company. And we certainly see that as a strategic differentiator within Microsoft. We want to provide every developer a great setup, but we also see more and more CIOs, IT directors asking, hey, how can we do a better job with this? Because we're feeling it more than we've ever felt it before.
Right, so you bring up a really good point. We talk at Forrester all the time, CIOs are sort of at that critical junction right now, right? There's all this pent-up demand. They haven't been able to do that many projects because they were focused on cost cutting. There's a bunch of pent-up demand that they need to deliver on, and at the same time, all the folks in the business actually have access to more technology than they ever have before, right? The consumerization of IT, they can bring what they have, in their home life into the workplace, or they want to. They could circumvent IT completely and go outsource it with SaaS and cloud companies and so forth. So from your perspective, what does the smart CIO do in that situation? Do they just start running as fast as possible so they don't lose the attention of the business? Do they hunker down because there's so much risk inherent in doing that? What does a smart CIO do? What would you give as advice?
I would never tell, hunkering down's a bad thing to do regardless, right? So here's, I want to build off of Chris's point, right? If you listen to his remarks, every remark has been around, it's about finding great people, right? HR was a backwater tributary in a corporation, right? The ability to recruit, onboard, and ramp new talent is a phenomenal career at this point because it's a major challenge of any company. From a technology perspective, I do think about the separation of the T from the I, that there's one thing to have hardened infrastructure, it's table stakes, but how do you mine information for competitive advantage to enable those folks, recognizing that they're going to produce information as much as they're going to consume information, right? The world at any one of our companies is full of authors. That has to be managed. Hunkering down is the equivalent of dying. Just, it might take longer.
Slow death, right? Yeah. Anybody, any other thoughts, Sundar?
I mean, I think, just to echo what they're saying, going back to the same model, I think, like hunkering down and all those things would lead to the right hand, which is, you have to run your existing infrastructure well, you got to support your people really well, but you got to free up enough resources in order to do the left-handed things, which is, if the CIO or whoever's responsible for technology is not a good partner with the CEO, I mean, manufacturing may be protected for now, but if you looked at what happened in newspaper or any other business that got digitized, music, things that you thought, now it's obvious, but 5 years ago it wasn't. But the person who's in charge of technology almost has to keep his eye or her eye open to see how could you change your business so that something different is going to happen. So you either drive your top line or you may even lose your existing business. So I think it's kind of schizophrenic. You've got to do all the things greatly, which control your environment, make sure it's running well, and at the same time free up enough resources.
So how do they do that, right?
Well, there is an empathy gap with the CIO, right? That's just, it's a ridiculously hard job because, when we were talking prior to this, the easiest project to approve at Iron Mountain or any one of our companies is one that doesn't touch IT, right? Because it's like, all right, because there's this, intersection of priorities, and that's where prioritization and the harsh prioritization that you were referring to runs into a wall because people will circumvent it, and that CIO as COO and then CIO as CTO
right.
is really kind of the intersection that needs to be navigated, and it's got nothing to do with playing defense.
Yeah, some of this, though, I think is actually liberating for a CIO because, if you think about some of the areas of the business that were classically underserved, where people like human resources and sales. If you think about some of the SaaS solutions that have come out in the last few years, it's not just the delivery methodology that have made those better. It's actually having experts that, would actually focus on having tools that for performance management or whatever that actually people wouldn't have to have big, thick manuals to read and you wouldn't have to update. So to me, having a lot of the options now with either cloud computing or SaaS, to me, would actually be liberating. And I think our CIO thinks like that. And it actually produces, I think, them to have time to go and energy to go off and focus on other things.
Right.
There's no doubt we see a lot of customers considering the cloud for workloads that they think are more manageable for them to outsource or to have someone else worrying about. Email certainly is the primary one. So then, we had one CIO say, hey, I'm not going to beat my competitor by running Exchange better than them. So we're going to let Microsoft run it, and they'll probably run it better than I could ever run it, and that's going to free up resources for me to do other things. And of course, because it's running in the cloud, it's going to give people newer tools. Rather than running the old stuff that we had before, we're actually going to have the latest version of this stuff in the cloud, and I won't even have to pay much attention to it because Microsoft will do it. That'll free us up to do something different. We've seen a lot of CIOs go on a more progressive proactive campaign internally to literally try to articulate the problems that employees are telling them and to articulate how they're going to get after them. Oftentimes that can be things around unified communications, so very painful for a lot of companies to just get on a conference call. Let's make that better. A lot of times it was search. We see enterprise search as being an area where people are so used to finding stuff on the internet relatively easily, then they turn inside internally and they're just hopeless. It's hopeless to find something inside many organizations, probably getting to Bob's point about how much garbage you might have in your organization. But, proactively deciding that you're going to take one thing at a time, and then doing a little internal evangelism around the fact that, look, we're giving you great enterprise search tools this quarter, and in the second half of the year, we're going to make it easier for you to do communications from wherever you are. Then next, it's going to be social networking inside our company in a protected way. That notion of essentially marketing to employees, that you're taking some of these notions from the consumer world and doing them in a great way and in a safe way. We see more and more CIOs really tackling that head on.
So not necessarily huge projects, but little wins that turn them into heroes, if you will, rather than, the person that says no all the time, or it'll take a long time.
That's right.
Good.
Well, the whole huge project thing is under siege too, right?
Yeah.
For years, we all sold to CIOs, and I see them now saying that they want to buy. The best relationships we have are with CIOs that sit me or somebody like me down in my company and say, here are the problems I have, go think about it and get back to me. As opposed to, just 5 years ago, I was showing up saying, hey, here's what we'd like to sell you, and here's how we'd like you to buy. The whole paradigm has shifted.
Yeah.
They're just, they're not interested in being sold to at all.
Makes your job just that much more fun, right?
Well, if you can get them to, it does make it, you're able to drive more value as a corporation if you can actually capture what their problems are and go think about it, presuming you have the time to do that. The problem is many technology companies have a bookings number that they have to hit inside of that reporting period that without any regard to cloud, right? They have that quarter, so they got to sell that gear.
Yep.
You have to be able to think about these problems over time and solve them over time, and that's a dramatic shift, notwithstanding all the marketing around cloud. That's hard for technology companies to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's open it up to the audience for questions. Please feel free to come up to the microphones if you guys have questions for the panelists. So as we're hopefully getting some folks to come up, don't be shy, please. Let me ask you guys one more thing. Given the shift, given the expectations that are new for CIOs, what do you look for? If you were hiring a new CIO today, what would you look for in terms of their background? We're seeing a lot more that have not necessarily risen through the ranks within IT, but have come from the business, have come from consulting firms maybe. From your perspective, what would you look for? Sundar, what would you look for?
I mean, given the nature of our business, we look for somebody who's pretty innovative and really thinking about things constantly in a new way. So, from our perspective, the CIO function has to be, if possible, completely variable. Right, so in the sense that can somebody actually run a thing that if your sales go not to zero, but close to that, can they actually scale it all the way down and then scale it all the way up? And what can that person actually handle doing something that radical? So I think it's probably not what most people are looking for, but we look for something, in that fashion.
Is that similar to other folks, or do you think it's very different given your situation?
Well, first of all, our CIO is in the audience, so I'm not looking for anybody here. But I think first of all, we are looking for a business leader. And I think that's the key thing, because if you think about what the role of the CIO is today, they're really the person in many cases has to span functions or span business groups. And so if we're going into, whether it's a new market or a new geography or whatever, and we're doing it with different spearheads, and a lot of times it's the CIO that's actually one of the unifying forces.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. We see that a lot, really the CIO, because the business is so siloed in a lot of organizations, the CIO is a huge opportunity to identify areas for innovation that span the different silos that no one really else in the organization often has that line of sight, if you will.
So I can, it's probably a decent story worth telling. So my CIO and I have worked together on and off since 1984. And have been partners in just how our careers have grown, and we've had the opportunity to work together, not work together, reconvene. And Bill is transitioning right now. He'll be speaking later this morning to run the intersection of all things compliant for us, because our value proposition is one of compliance. And we look at how much money we spend on the intersection of compliance, because we have 97% of the Fortune 1000's information, right? So We understand regulation. We understand the overhangs that come with that. We also understand the inefficiencies that exist within our company, and by being able to transition that to a value proposition, Bill's pivoting to that. So we're also partnering on kicking off a CIO search, right? And we're saying, we spent yesterday talking about this because you want to make sure that you've got the scope correct.
Yeah.
And it's got nothing to do with hunkering down. It's got nothing to do with technology. There's a presumption that we'll let Microsoft do the exchange and that we'll let the art technology groups do the e-commerce provisioning. We expect that. That's not what we're looking for. We're saying, all right, given our vision as a company, how do we leverage the next CIO to really get at information for competitive advantage, not only for the purpose of running our company more effectively and driving organic growth over time, but for the purpose of advancing that cause with our customers. And you could argue that that's a purple squirrel that we're looking for, right? That's not a typical, that's not a stereotypical CIO search, but we believe it is the future of the business. We believe it is the future of creating competitive advantage, not just for our company, but for all companies.
So let me just push you a little bit further on that one.
Sure.
What then,
Bill did, so you might as well.
So what background are you looking for? You're probably not going through, the proverbial Rolodex of CIOs that you know out in the industry. What are you looking for in terms of where they've come from and what their background has been? You are subject to that which you know, right? So I do think of the best CIOs that I know, but I think about those that are really focused on driving competitive advantage, that have been in a business that has had to deal with very rapid growth as opposed to a lot of contraction, because it brings a different mindset with it. But we're very open to having folks that have come up through marketing, because there's also this whole shift that I referred to quickly about how people buy, right? They don't want to be sold to, right? And you have to help them buy better, in addition to getting at the information silos. So this isn't an easy search for us, right? It's not like we were dissatisfied with where we were from a technology perspective, quite the contrary. It's, all right, how do we get to the next level, and how do we use that as a guiding light for what we're trying to accomplish in the market, and helping companies achieve competitive advantage by knowing what information they have, looking into it, across it, and leveraging it for competitive advantage. It's a massive opportunity, and it's presenting itself today as a massive problem, because I would argue that most of us are faced with the two problems of growth and all the other problems. Yep. Good. We have a question from the audience? I saw some. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Matt Hooper. I'm with a company called Infuronics. We actually, our founder in the late 60s, early 60s, came from MIT. So we're an MIT-founded company. My question really is around a comment you made, and I heard the same comment made by the CIO of Microsoft, Tony Scott. The CIO of the future needs to become like the COO. However, I'm the CIO. I'm also the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer. I own marketing. I'm not a colors guy, but I'm an analytics person. I look at trends. I look at market segments. I look at those types of things. I see the CIO of the future being more kind of like on the market driving side, and that's what I'm hearing. So why do we say the COO of the future will be the CIO or that comment? Because I've heard that.
I just think there's an element of COO that exists inside of a CIO's office. If I look at my CIO, Bill Brown, and a lot of his time is spent managing the intersection of business initiatives with IT projects, and emphasizing and de-emphasizing, what has to get done. And there's a traffic management associated with the job that I can only liken in my mind's eye to that of a COO. It's keeping track of a lot of things while you're pivoting. So there's this intersection of master tactician and emerging strategist that is, I use the phrase purple squirrel, but it's a very, very hard and important job.
Another question? Yeah, Phil.
Sorry, just so to follow up, so again, I see that COO as a gatekeeper, right?
Yeah.
They're one who can control, and
Yep.
I'm big into process frameworks, IDLE, and the folks in
Yep.
SIM who know me, I'm an advocate for that stuff. But I feel that those things are in place to innovate, right? If we have processes, or we have things that prevent us from taking on the new challenges and innovating into new steps, like I'm faced constantly with going to my clients and helping them appreciate what social media is, because we provide consumer support services. And they don't want to have social media. They don't even want to talk about it. I'm like, you're crazy. If you don't want to hear the complaints of your consumers, that's a mistake, right? So I'm trying to help them to embrace these new ideas, innovate. I don't see the COO helping on that side of things. What I see them as the quality controls, the metrics, those types of things. So is it still something that needs to be segmented, or are you going to find that anal retentive control freak who's also very innovative? I don't know if, I mean, that's...
You're on the right track.
Is it possible, though? I guess that's a good question. Are we asking too much of the CIO?
You are asking too much if they're the only person who shoulders the burden. You know, they have to have great partnership.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't put all the burden on this one human being to do everything from keeping the network up and running to building the new innovative internal thing to figuring out what the business. I mean, come on, that's crazy. It has to be a great partnership with your business leaders. It has to be a great partnership with the CEO, right? There's got to be joint accountability and joint bets made. There are just too many things that you could possibly do as any set of business leaders. You got to pick your bets. And so, you know, I'll give one quick example. It goes back to something Sundar said earlier, where you kind of have to pull the Band-Aid off. Otherwise, there's always going to be excuses to continuing to do what you do before. Today, we have about 65,000 Microsoft employees who only use our software to make phone calls. They don't use any PBX at all. And the CIO has to be the one that says, we're literally taking the ability to make the phone calls using the PBX away from employees.
Right.
If you give them the option of using the phone and using our software to make phone calls from within Outlook, some percentage are going to use the Outlook option, but a whole bunch of people are just going to do what they're used to doing. When you go in and take the phone out, guess what? People need to make phone calls, and so they're going to migrate to the new way of doing that. The CIO needs to have the support of every business leader to say to all of their employees, your phones are gone.
Right.
We are taking them away. Here's why. It saves us a ton of money, and B, we're going to ask our customers to do the same thing, and we're going to figure out how to do it really well first ourselves. The CIO cannot do that without the support of the business leaders that they are, they're trying to enable.
I was just going to say, Tony must not have been very popular that day.
Well, we didn't put it on Tony. Tony didn't do it.
So it didn't appear that way, which I think is a key learning here.
Of course not.
Okay.
Tony was supporting what our group
leaders
said
decided.
was critical for the business.
Yep.
The same way that we have employees that when they do a search on the internet, we show them results from Google, we show them results from Bing, and there's a button where they can click to tell us whether they like the Google results or the Bing results. Tony's doing that,
Yeah.
but he's doing that on behalf of the search team. And the search team is the one who sends mail to all the employees saying, hey, starting next week, every time you do a search, we're asking you to click one more button to tell us who's better,
Yep.
and that'll help us get better.
That's good.
So it's got to be a partnership.
Yeah. Bob, did you have a point you wanted to say?
Well, I just wanted to build on Chris's point that there's a backdoor into IT that still doesn't get the scrutiny that you receive in finance. And I think finance has to be, a lockstep partner with IT, that things shouldn't be put in flight without, hurdles and commits being signed up to from a financial perspective, right? Even if it's like, this is a leap of faith, blind bet, let's call it out as such. But there's too many fires that are allowed to start that really don't bring competitive advantage or any kind of economic advantage. And I think that's where the point that Chris was making is, if it's left to just the CIO or any one function, it becomes a policing function, and you're in your hunkering down spiral. And it's not, you can't blame IT, you can only blame yourself as the CEO.
Right. Another question over here?
Sorin Faibish, MC. I would like to go back to a discussion that was more discussed last year about the relation between the CIOs and CTOs. And should we have one CIO, CTO together? Technologically, does it make sense? How do you see that happen the last year in the economy being worse? So the question is what's more important for your companies, the CTO part, which should take care of what products to bring to the market, innovative, and so the market needs them, or the CIO to bring new tools in order to increase productivity? So
it's a good question. So and we get this all the time too at Forrester, the CIO versus CTO, and if the CTO is positioned more as utilizing technology to innovate the products or services that the organization is delivering, and the CIO is more of empowering and supporting the employee base, who's more important, or is that even the right delineation anymore? It sounds like we're talking more and more of the CIO taking on all of this stuff. Is that right, or should we split it between the two? What have you guys seen, either internally or with your customers as well?
I mean, we've always split the two because, like you said, the function of the CIO is more operational, at least in our companies, to make sure everything works and they've got the appropriate tools, whereas the CTO is innovating on the product. But it also depends on the personality. I mean, we look at two personalities. You've got a manager who's very good at dispensing caution in some ways, making sure that nothing goes wrong. And then you've got leaders who actually dispense hope. So if you got the right person, they could kind of do both. But frequently we've actually had to separate the two functions.
Purple squirrel issue again.
Yeah, in our case, we have the function split as well. So our CIO focuses more on internal operations, although some of those operations are actually destined for customers, for them to consume directly. Our CTO is really more on product innovation. So it's more like what was described.
Have you guys what have you seen with customers? Have you run into this with your customers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you do see, I think it varies by industry.
Yeah.
Certainly the more R&D heavy the industry, the more likely someone is to have a CTO. Often that we see that role more as sort of a radar screen for things that the businesses might not be sensitized to spotting. So that's often the thing we see, and it does seem to be more geared towards companies where IP is their business, less so where professional services or production of physical goods might be the core competency.
Good. Question over here.
We've talked a lot about the CIO and expectations of the skill sets that the CIO would have from CIO to CTO, et cetera, and a business partner. Can you talk a little bit about when you go to hire the other functions in your organization, be they the marketers, the finance persons, the operations, the service delivery side, can you talk about what you look for in them so that the CIO has a good partner?
Great question.
Well, I go back to what Chris had started out with, right? If I were starting my career right now, I would go into HR. Right, the domain has been built out of running HR as a transactional kind of engine and armchair psychologist, and that is not the future of building great organizations. It is about identifying, recruiting, ramping, and teaming organizations, doing organizational development as a discipline that exists from your front line. Through to the CEO requesting constructive feedback and getting it, which can be exhausting. But fundamentally, HR to me is the key to all of our futures. If you forget about the transactional part of HR, which is, I think, what is happening with all of these domains inside of a company is that there's an expectation around baseline transactional capability so that we can, that marketing will overtake selling, right? Organizational development will certainly overtake comp and benefits. Information management will overtake technology management. And that is the pivot that I think we're going through as we search for growth in what is somebody described as the new economy. Because I don't know about you guys, but I don't see huge catalysts for growth outside of putting information to competitive advantage. I see that as being the primary catalyst for future growth.
So if that's true, then in theory, you'd want all of your business leaders to have a pretty high technology IQ, if you will, right? And be strong partners, potentially with IT, but just in general, thinking about that piece of it, how to use technology to innovate, to grow their business operations as a whole. So how do you look for that? How do you look for that? How do you make sure that all of your business leaders are good partners with IT, to the question?
Well, for us, I think it's more relevant because we're in that business. So obviously we have the domain, but to answer the question, we look for people and how they've interacted with colleagues in the past. And I really don't know if there's a difference between how they would interact with a CIO if it was the head of engineering dealing with the CMO.
Okay.
So either you have some orientation towards working with colleagues, or in my opinion, you don't. And so I don't know if I would say that the CIO is necessarily unique in that.
Okay.
They obviously have some unique challenges around that part of it. But I think, when we look for executives to join the team, we're really interested in how they've dealt with colleagues in the past, because that's probably going to be an indicator no matter who else, they're interacting with.
Regardless of the function. Okay.
So we have two quick
more
questions before the panel close.
Hi, my name is Kevan Khawaja, and I run a software consulting and IT services company. And what I see in some of our customers, which are fairly large enterprises, is a dual problem, which perhaps is plaguing large enterprises, both here in the US and in Europe now. What we see is that a lot of industries right now are being supported by intervention of the governments. And a lot of business models which were relevant in the past may not be relevant in the future. And so it's a transitory period where the CIO is plagued with a lot of software application and infrastructure which is built on older models, business models. Just to give you one example, in the financial services industry, which has been the hardest hit in the last 2 years, we are now finding that most of the analysts are saying, or the economists are saying, that there were fundamental mistakes made in the framing of the Basel Accord. The bankers made mistakes in allocating risk ratings, etc. So not only is the technological infrastructure mired in legacy, the investments that we wanted large enterprises to make in SOA or flexible software have not been made yet. And on the other hand, the business models, some of them are not going to survive. So I think it's a dual problem. It's not only an information management or analytics problem. It's a fundamental business problem, a model problem which is changing, and it's a technological problem which is
I'll go back to what Sundar said. I mean, I'd go back to where Sundar was talking about how he sets up his companies. I mean, I would build on that point. I would disagree with the point that the financial services sector was the hardest hit. That hasn't been my experience. But the way you were talking about burning the boats is how you change. I read the best quote I read in the newspaper in the last month was, I actually can't remember who it was from, but it said, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance less. And I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we do is, since we do these migrations from one architecture to the other, so when you look at applications like that, you've got three options. The first one is, you re-architect. It means you fundamentally got a good application, it's just in the wrong architecture. So you might want to move it from, a mainframe to a client server to a cloud or whatever you'd like to do. The second one is it's good, but it doesn't have all the functions. You might want to build around it and just connect into it. And the third one is something like the risk management. You might want to just pillage and burn it because it just doesn't work. So if you're using VAR in a lot of cases and you wanted to switch to expected shortfall as a measure or something like that, dramatically different, you just want to change your risk model completely and change it. So I think from the business perspective, you got to figure which of these three you want to do and then pick the right strategy to get that done.
Great. Do we have one more question in the audience? Go right ahead.
I'm Joe Moresso, and I work for a talent management consulting firm. My earlier life I spent in the Army, and we had a saying, we help you be the very best you can be. So I'd like to know, how do you, on an ongoing basis, help your CIO be the best leader they can be, and how do they help you be the best leader that you can be?
Great ending question. Who wants to take that? Chris, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. One thing is to try to balance the pragmatism with the innovation and change management. So from my perspective, we have a big belief in sort of using our own technology inside the company and making sure that everybody is really building on what we have. Doing that in a pragmatic way. Before we take people's phones away, are we setting up the CIO for a terrible burden, or are we really ready for that? How do we do that in a staged way? So every one of the business groups feels a tremendous amount of pressure for you to roll out what we build to all Microsoft employees, and yet the CIO needs to be set up for success there. So for us, I think it's a pragmatic approach to how we use our own technology internally that can help make a hero out of the CIO, help them, introduce new technologies successfully and have people actually adopt them. That would be the big one for us inside of Microsoft.
Anyone else have another thought?
Yeah, I think a couple things. First of all, in terms of, a CEO support of a CIO, I think there's some things that, may not understand or may not even necessarily agree with, but there's got to be some degrees of freedom and innovation and, ability to experiment. I think the other way, it's having this one level up. So it's not just what's the success of IT, but if you can get, like my example earlier of our CIO being on the hook for part of the successful acquisition and integration of the company, that's one level up from what, it's just, are the systems running correctly?
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you all. Thanks to the panelists for joining us today, and also thank you to the audience for great questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.